pleased that some people stuck around to the end. That's fantastic. We do have some more people coming in. But welcome today to the Early Innovators Podcast, brought to you by Mooter Health out of Morgantown, West Virginia. Mooter Health is a digital health startup that helps organizations, our clients, connect with hard-to-reach, vulnerable, and at-risk populations. We're going to hear more about that from Arya in a moment, but first, today's session is entitled Balancing Act. We're going to explore the navigation between the delicate balance of technology progression and the responsible data stewardship, which is why we've invited Barbie to my right. With that, Barbie Mooneyhan, Chief Information Security Officer at Uplight. Uplight's a technology partner for energy providers and the clean energy ecosystem. Barbie blends her psychology background and IT expertise to lead cutting-edge security and privacy programs across industries, from healthcare, where we've worked together, to energy, where she is today. Barbie's a longtime mentor and advocate through Women in Cybersecurity. Love to hear more about that in a few moments. And she's passionate about protecting people while advancing technology responsibly. She's also a UT graduate, so welcome volunteer. To Barbie's right, I'm joined by Arya Satish, co-founder of Mooter Health, sponsor of today's podcast and session. Arya is a healthcare innovator and a public health scholar from Johns Hopkins. Arya has been working to make proactive, tech-enabled behavioral health support both scalable and sustainable. So his work at Mooter, where we currently collaborate and work together, has impacted already 20,000 plus patients in medically underserved communities. We're going to hear more about that today. And my name's Jim Murray. I'm a commercial growth leader currently working with Mooter Health from a growth and development perspective. I'm the host of today's session and podcast that we're recording, with over 2 decades of experience scaling digital technology companies, including in the health tech area, Wobot Health, which is a digital chatbot for mental health purposes and support, and Patients Like Me, which is now owned by United Health Group. Commercialization, strategic partnerships, innovation, that all has rolled up to me over the years. So today's session, what we're going to talk about here, healthcare innovation accelerating at an unprecedented pace. From AI-powered diagnostics, digital-first care delivery models, we're absolutely seeing the boundaries pushed to improve access and improve outcomes, but comes with that a huge challenge. I'm sure several challenges actually, but protecting patient privacy and data security without slowing innovation. So we're going to hear from an innovation side and from a security privacy perspective today. How do we balance that tech progress with the responsible data stewardship? Okay, with that, I'm going to hand it over to Arya for a moment. And Arya, love to hear, how can emerging technologies help close an access gap for underserved populations? And with that, maybe you tell us a little bit more about Mooter Health.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to. It's a great question. One of the things that we always talk about with technology, and heard a lot during this session about AI and different use cases, what is the end goal that we're trying to achieve? And to tell you, I think, Jim, as you referenced the Mooter origin story, helps illustrate how when we start with the end in mind, who are we trying to impact? How are we trying to impact them? And what is the best way that we can learn their needs and what the best solution is going to look like for them? When you come at it from that framework and with that type of approach, you start to see some really special results. And that's how you also start to make an impact in the healthcare field and in a lot of fields with technology. So the origin story of Mooter starts with a very similar type of story and a narrative. We had 2 clinicians in the state of West Virginia, a very underserved rural health community. Both clinicians were excellent practitioners. One of them a psychiatrist treating patients with bipolar disorder. And in her work, she found that she was asking the same questions of each and every patient. When they would come in, she'd say, "How have you been sleeping? Have you been moving? Since I last saw you, have you noticed any changes?" And the patients that she was working with, she found that she was getting a lot of very subjective responses. If you were to ask any one of us up here or anyone in the audience, "How have you been sleeping for the last several weeks or couple of months?" The pre-programmed response, "Fine." And in her field, she was looking for ways that she can find additional data to help support and paint a more illustrative picture of each and every patient. So what she decided to do was really interesting. She went down to the local Walmart, picked up 10 Fitbits, and started handing them out to her patients so that when they would go back home, they'd wear the Fitbits, and then at the next visit, she could ask them if they were comfortable to share what that data looked like, and then correlate that data with their responses. So that was the first core tenet and a story that Mutter emerged from, the idea of, in a very subjective space, how can we pull out objective, actionable insights? The second story is a clinician in northern West Virginia, in Morgantown, and she was treating perinatal patients. And we've become very well versed in this field. It's actually the field that Mutter started with, in perinatal mental health. New and expectant mothers oftentimes are struggling, what we say, suffering in silence, slipping through the cracks of a very reactive system. So what she decided to do was improve upon and implement a proactive outreach model. The idea that in a very reactive healthcare system, we can go to people, meet them where they are, reach them outside of the four walls of healthcare. And so Mutter emerged from these two stories and combined them into a solution that today serves over 20,000, actually now over 25,000 patients across underserved communities, West Virginia, the greater Appalachian region, and soon to be Nashville as well, working with some of the great organizations here. But just to bring it back to your question, Jim, when we start with the end in mind, where we go to the patients, the clinicians, the users of whatever type of technology that you're using, and include the stakeholders and form a more complete picture and listen as opposed to speak at people and learn from them, you start to see some pretty incredible results. And that's what the Mutter Health brand is built off of.
So I think one of the things that I think about whenever I think about accessing individuals that don't normally have the care or the thing that because I'm not just healthcare, there's other industries as well, financial, and there's legal industries, and there's healthcare industries and energy industries, and there's underrepresented communities and populations that may not have access to the things that larger populations do. Example is healthcare is huge in Nashville, right? We have access to some of the best doctors in Nashville. People travel from all over to be able to access our doctors and our systems, which I think is pretty powerful here. But I had an accident, 2017. I shattered my knee. Whenever I went to the hospital, I went to the amazing Vanderbilt, and I had a specialist that was able to rebuild my knee. That is very impactful and powerful, because anywhere else, I would have a limp today. I would not have had the type of care here. And I think that's what technology is allowing us to be able to do, is to take some of those use cases. Now, could you have somebody life flight into a rural community and be able to do that work? No, but we can help bridge the gap in the access of knowledge and the access of technology to help individuals that aren't in the areas that have the experts. I think it's really powerful. So whenever I think about innovation, obviously I'm a privacy and security person as well, so I have a lot of opinions, just a lot of them. But whenever I think about using technology to give the access to everyone and not to those privileged to be in the spaces that the care or the resources are available to them, I think it's incredibly important, and I think it's incredibly powerful. That being said, how do we do that, right? Like, this part of this conversation is how do we do that while also keeping the patient or keeping the end user, the energy consumer, or the people working within finances, the bank users? How do we keep their data in mind, and how do we make sure that we're putting frameworks in place that we know the thing is supposed to be doing the thing it's supposed to be doing? Because we can also do harm. If we don't do it right, we can do harm to the end users. We can do harm to the people we're trying to protect and we're trying to help. And so I'm really excited about continuing the conversation on how we can do that. But as far as like innovation in rural communities and getting the things to people that aren't in as privileged as a population as other individuals, there's a lot of benefits to being rural as well, but may not have the access that other people may have access to.
Digging just a little bit deeper, innovation and access, does that mean that when technology advancements are created for a patient in mind, patient centricity, is it important to be able to integrate into existing workflows and existing systems? Can you build with the idea of what tomorrow's going to bring?
I'm going to go first.
I'll let you jump in. I think it's a really good question you bring up. A lot of times with technology, companies or solutions that are trying to overthrow whatever the legacy provider is, The way that at least we approached it, and we've seen this to be successful in a lot of different industries, is how can you embed yourself with what already exists? Because that's going to lead to much faster adoption. You're going to see better outcomes. And at the end of the day, what really matters is how you're taking the idea of where this system exists and we want to get it to here. You can't just jump over that entire bridge of all of these various steps to getting there. So in the process of integrating with existing workflows, with existing solutions, and whatever people are doing currently that your product addresses, you elevate them from one step to the next. And that's an area that within healthcare, Barbie, you and I were just talking about this. Sometimes clinicians hear the words automation, AI, technology, and they fully shut off. A lot of people, this entire conference, we've certainly been hearing a lot about that. So when you come from the perspective of whatever it is you're currently doing, we'll work around that. We'll help you get onto a new system or a new workflow that makes your life a little bit better each and every day. And then several months down the line, all of a sudden you've crossed all of those various stages and steps and then taken them to where you really want to be.
Barbie, I'm going to add to that and have you respond, because I think that brings up then the next section, privacy and security. So what is the right balance between data-driven innovation and privacy protections?
So I think, first of all, whenever we're talking about innovation, sometimes I want to piggyback just for a moment on what he was just saying, because I think it's important, especially as we try to make sure that the technology becomes available in the appropriate way, but we make sure that the technology becomes available. You brought up that a lot of people, as soon as they start hearing the buzzwords, they click off. They don't understand what you're saying. And it doesn't matter how many times you try to wrap it back around to what they would understand. The moment that you start talking technical, they're going to disconnect. Because a lot of individuals in more rural areas or in some of the other arenas and industries, if they're not tech focused. They want to get back to their jobs. They don't want to get to the technology that you're creating for them. So I think one of the pieces of a successful innovation is, one, you have to make sure that you understand what that population, who you're trying to sell to, what problems are they solving, not solving technology problems. You have to understand your client at the end of the day. You have to understand the end person using your product or having your services, because some people are not tech innovation necessarily. But you have to understand the end user, and then you have to understand how to communicate with them. And then you have to have an adoption period. If you don't understand your adoption period, if you don't understand that you're solving for their problem and you're talking to them about solving their problem, you're not going to get very far. And then you have to make sure that in the implementation and the delivery phases that you're meeting those metrics, you're meeting those marks, and you're having the conversations to make sure that it's successful and that they understand what's going on. So I just want to add that in. But also, whenever we talk, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about trust later on, but one of the things I think about when we push forward with innovation is there's a lot of data that is coming from innovation. There's a lot of other concerns and considerations as well. But whenever you're talking about a mass set of data, I like to ask, what's the creep factor? Like all the time, I get, Barbie, can I come do that? Can I do this with the data? Mm-hmm. Can we do this with the data? And the first thing, Jim has heard me on many occasions, what's the creep factor? If we went to the person that's using this, that's inputting their data, it's their data. If we went and talked to them and said, I'm going to do this with the data, would they look at you and cringe? Would it make you nervous to go have that conversation with them? That's the creep factor. And whenever we talk about the creep factor in the decisions that we're making, I think that again sources it back to the end users to understand what types of impacts your usage of someone's data can have on not only them, but their personal health. It can have on their personal security. It can have on, in some cases, like for the energy industry, it can have impact on the grid and everything that's associated with the importance and the influence of the grid. And so when we talk about how we utilize and we talk about how we share and how we protect the data itself, we're talking about how creepy is this going to be if this data got out? Or how creepy is it going to be when we go talk to those end users and we say, do you mind if we just take this data right now and go do this other thing with it? We have to ask that question to ourselves. And I feel like whenever I've had these conversations in the past, it really has been this flow of, it stops the room. It really does stop the room.
So Barbie,
Yeah.
we were talking earlier, guardrails in place, right?
Oh, yeah,
HIPAA,
absolutely.
HIPAA ensures that's not going to happen, right? We can be as innovative as we want. HIPAA will make sure that everything's fine.
You're funny.
This is where we're going to add some playful debate, I think, right?
Yeah, you're
Because
funny.
this guy over here is selling into hospitals
Yep.
and health plans and employers and higher education.
Oh, I want to know more about
HIPAA's going
that.
to protect all that.
I want to know more about this employer and educators, because that opens a whole nother ball of fun facts. So I'm going to pass the mic over just to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be pretty fun.
I love everything about what you were saying, Barbie, about the creep factor. It's a funny term, but it's very applicable. When we're going, Jim was saying, when we're talking with higher education or with employers about their constituents being supported on the platform, it all starts with the fundamental idea that we could all use someone just reaching out to us, checking in on how we're doing, and a guiding hand through our lives and through everything that we do on a daily basis. And the way that we've approached that, and I think this is a fantastic approach in a biased way, but the way that we've approached that is we don't necessarily need to mine all of the different data sources in every possible avenue. We certainly can. And Jim, to your point, sometimes there aren't guardrails for that type of thing. But the way that we've approached it is directly with the end user, with a clinician, with a benefits manager, with an employee, with a patient, with a student. What are they willing to share? What do they find helpful in sharing? And when you turn that over, figuratively and literally turn that mic over to the populations that you're serving, that's one of the ways that we've built that into our protocols. The solution that we've designed and the work that we do is relying on those end users and all of the different stakeholders through that process to inform us on what is comfortable to be shared, what isn't, where do certain lines need to be drawn, and how do we approach that conversation.
So keep adding the questions as you get the microphone, but it is a really good time to talk about trust, right?
Yeah.
Outcomes in trust. How do we even know if we're making measurable improvements to what we're designing something to help people's lives and help their care and help them stay as healthy in place as long as possible, help repair your knee?
Yeah.
How do we measure that?
That's a really good question.
There's guardrails everywhere, right?
As long as you're applying them, I think that's important,
All of
right?
these systems have to have guardrails.
Depends on your implementation of the system. So an example is you can have cloud services, but you can also set up your cloud services insecurely. You can also make decisions internally that you're using data in ways that you didn't get approval for or that somebody may not be aware of. You can have all the systems in the world that are HIPAA compliant, but that doesn't mean you're HIPAA compliant. It means your systems are HIPAA compliant. The way they run is compliant. It doesn't mean that you, as a company, are HIPAA compliant. So understanding the frameworks that you have to be underneath of, depending on whether or not it's FERPA or it's, I think, FERPA school, or it's HIPAA or it's SOX compliance or any of the other industry and or regulatory components, you still have to think about how you're putting your programs into place and how you're utilizing the tools and technology to create the innovative things that you're creating. I actually wanted to ask him more questions, so I may take this a little off the topics up here, but I like what you said around having the conversation with the end users and making sure that you understand. I'm curious around the educators and the education and employees, because oftentimes historically, one of the strongest issues that we've had in the industry is working with employers for their constituents, for their employees, and we're working with very sensitive data, especially from a clinical perspective, or what could be considered to be health data, but may not be protected underneath of HIPAA, because there is a difference in that. So if you are not in with a covered entity and a clinician is not there, it may not be protected underneath of HIPAA. If you're outside of those boundaries, you are now looking at state and you are now looking at federal laws. And that's the things that are protecting you as a user for that data. I'm just curious, and one, like, how are those conversations going? Historically, I've always seen a resistance from employees to have their employers have too much of their data and trying to make decisions based off of your mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's certainly a hot button topic right now more than ever. The conversations that we're having and the model that we've developed this offering is a little bit unique because we don't necessarily have or need to have full data sharing with an employer about all of their employee data. So the way that we've approached that is, in the past, both with employers and with employees, and Barbie, I have a question for you too after this, but you mentioned the solution and product design. There's a whole other component about it, which is how is it being used, who owns the data, where does that live? And so one of the things that where we've drawn the line is, well, exactly what types of quantitative, objective insights are we collecting, and what's necessary and what's helpful to someone like a life coach navigator that we have supporting these employees. We don't necessarily need every single behavioral health assessment that they've ever taken in the last 20 or 30 years of their history. Could it be helpful? Yes, but a perfect example of where you don't necessarily need to mine every single data source. You certainly have the ability to with technology today, and it could form some type of picture of somebody. But when you engage with that person directly, ask them what they are and aren't willing to share, and then for us, share how we're a separate organization. We're not necessarily embedded. We're not their company's HR department checking in on them to just collect information. And so that's where we've found a really interesting niche and a spot to play in, with employers care about the health and well-being of their employees for a lot of reasons: productivity gains, retention, but they also don't necessarily need to have every single data point on their employees. Certainly would have to ask other employers, would they want to? Most would probably say yes, but sometimes it is nice to draw that line and have those guardrails in place. So along those same lines, the question that I'll throw back over to you is, you mentioned earlier that your product can be fully compliant with all the regulation, but then the way that it's being used, the workflows designed around the product, a whole array of other factors could influence that. So as you're looking at technology, potentially vetting technologies to deploy within your organization, how are you evaluating not only the product, but the entire solution, the offering, the company itself that you're looking to work with?
So we're touching on third-party risk management there. So I think excellent question. And so there's a couple of different answers here. One is if we're using a tech solution to solve a problem from a clinical perspective or from an energy perspective, right? So are we looking for the tech to be part of the product, or are we looking for it to be part of a workflow to what services we provide? So that's the first thing I would consider. Is this part of the product that we sell or the services that we sell, or is it something else, right? Is it something that helps us develop into our own environment from the business perspective? So that's the first question that I would have. If it's part of the product itself or part of how we solution to provide the services of the product that we sell, first thing is I would absolutely, so just an RFP process, which I think is incredibly important. I think that also brings back to the framework question, like how do you build trust? How do you have conversations? You have your request for proposal section, and part of that is a technology risk assessment, and part of that is a security risk assessment, as well as a privacy risk assessment. And so you having the good frameworks in place, understanding what your industry legal requirements, your regulatory requirements, what your client is going to care about as well is going to be top priority. You're going to be looking at, okay, for healthcare, high trust is one of the recognized certifications. If you're going international, ISO 27001 from a security perspective. If you want to do a detailed analysis report, you could do SOC 2. If you want to do it for long term, you do SOC 2 type 2. If you want financial, SOC 1. There's different things to look at of what do your clients care about and how are you building trust before you're even getting in the door with them. You're starting those conversations because the moment they're going to start asking you, are you familiar with the things that we care about? And then they're going to detail out what all controls do you have in place? How are you using the data? What type of data do you collect? Where does it go? Who is it shared with? Are we the controllers, or are they the controllers? And so I think just looking at our contractual obligations and looking at the relationship and how they utilize the data and how they secure the data is the things that I would look at.
Our time is up.
That was fast.
It was really fast, and there's a whole lot that we didn't even get into here. We didn't even talk about AI and machine learning at this point.
I think everybody's tired of AI and machine learning. Are we tapped on AI and machine learning today? No? Oh.
Maybe we come back to security at our next podcast. Maybe we bring Barbie back into the fold again.
Yeah,
next time.
That'd be great.
Ari, what's next for Mooder Health?
Yeah, one of the most exciting things that we've launched recently is our Early Innovators program. And so the Mooter Early Innovators program involves a partnership. It's a grant opportunity for organizations like higher education institutions, employers, health systems, health plans, any organization that cares about the health and well-being of its constituents. So the grant allows us to really dive into the mission, the why behind the work that they do, and the reason that they care for the support of their constituents. So it allows us to work with them to find grant opportunities, spotlight them and the amazing work that they do on our socials, and really form a more long-term collaboration in which we can continue to build together and elevate the health and well-being of their entire population. So the grant program is open now, and we're accepting applications from virtually any type of organization, like I mentioned, that cares about the health and well-being of their membership. And we provide up to a 1-to-1 matching grant in which these organizations are onboarded onto the platform. The why behind the grant. So we started this program, Mooter Health being founded in West Virginia, I mentioned earlier, a very underserved region and rural health communities. What we want to do is find the organizations that are forward-leaning, that care about innovation and that care about elevating the health and well-being of their population, and in oftentimes very resource-constrained environments, eliminate all of the potential, especially financial barriers to using a platform, a technology solution like Mooter that really has a great opportunity to help their constituents. So that's the why behind the grant program itself. Like I mentioned, we're accepting applications and continuing to look for fantastic partners to build on some of the partnerships that we've forged thus far.
So it sounds like the fact that Mooter is founded out of an area in the country that's particularly socioeconomically challenged and underserved in many health-related ways, at least. And as a for-profit entity, Mooter Health is even bringing money to the party to help other organizations come up and make innovation possible. Is that correct?
That's correct, Jim. One of the things that we know is that when we prioritize the health and well-being, especially in behavioral health, everyone wins. And there's a tremendous return on investment in terms of outcomes, financially, and all of the other facets as well. And so that's what we want to highlight and prioritize. We know that all of those resources exist, and Mooter wants to help these organizations get connected with those resources to apply this type of innovation. Because when we align on missions, oftentimes there are no barriers or challenges in achieving the outcomes we want to achieve.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, Barbie, for being here today. Until next time, that's the Early Innovator Podcast for Mooter Health.